So this video is for the lesson 1.5 homework. We are going to factor and we are going to divide. So factoring. Factoring is doing the opposite of the distributive property. Okay? So we need to know our factors. Okay? So what I've got here is I've got an 8x and I've got a negative 24. So what that means is I've got an 8 and a 24. Those are the only two numbers that I'm worried about. So the first thing I check is 24 divisible by 8. Yeah, I can divide 24 by 8 and I get a 3, which means I can divide 8 by 8 and I get a 1. Okay? So what that means is I can factor an 8 out. So how I do that is the 8 would go on the outside of the parentheses. And so when I do 8 divided by 8, I get a 1. That's all that's left over. So it would be a 1x because we got to kind of add that x back in there. But we don't write 1x. We just put an x. Then we got our minus sign. And then I would do 24 divided by 8, which gives me a 3. And so factoring is undoing all that work that we do with distributing. So if I use the distribution property, okay, 8 times x is 8x. 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. I should be able to get back to the original question.
Why do we divide 8 by itself?
Because if you factored out of one thing, you got to factor it out of all of them. Okay? Whatever you do to one. And that's so you can put it on the outside. And this comes into play later on in other units, like when we do quadratics and stuff, knowing how to factor a value out. But also later on in your math career, knowing how to simplify answers and stuff down. And so it seems counterproductive because here we've been spending 2 days, you know, getting rid of parentheses. And now we're going back to putting parentheses in it. But it's just working both ways. So here we've got a negative 3x and a 48. So my numbers here are negative 3 and 48. So again, first thing I check is 48 divisible by 3. Yeah? So what is 48 divided by 3? Check on a calculator, do it real quick. 16. Okay. And then I can divide.
Staff, just a reminder that we are on pep rally schedule and we will not have tutorials today. I have reshared the Bell schedule with you just in case you not sure what it is or anything else, but I have reshared that with you. It should be in your email, and so if you need to check and see what times class dismissed, I just shared that with you. Thank you.
All right. So negative 3 divided by 3 gives me a negative 1. So now this poses an issue because if I would write this out just like we did this one, right? If I pull a 3 out, and so I got a negative 1 left, so I would have negative 1x, so a negative x, and then I got a positive 16. We don't like having negatives at the front. We try to avoid that. So instead of dividing by just a regular 3, I want to divide by a negative 3. And so negative 3 divided by negative 3 would give me a positive 1. And then 48 divided by negative 3 would give me a negative 16. So when I rewrite this, I would write a negative 3 out front. I've got a positive 1, so 1x, or just 1, and then negative 16. And so we just don't like that negative being at the front of this thing. We want to try to factor it out if we can. All right, I'm going to have you do 3 and 4 on your own. I'm going to jump down here to number 5. So now I've got 2 letters. I've got a negative 20, and I'm going to keep the letter with it this time, and a negative 5y. So sometimes you got to look and go, okay, what number can I divide into both 20 and 5? What is it? Mm-hmm. So I just want to show you the math that's going on here. Fractions are just division. I typically write all my division as fractions. But I can take negative 20 and I can break it down into its factors. Negative 20 is the same as negative 4 times 5, and then that x is times x. And if I divide by x, mathematically what happens is if you have the same number on the top and the bottom of a fraction, they cancel. And so negative 20x divided by 5, well, now I don't have a bottom, and all I've got left on top is negative 4x. So that's what's happening there. So same here, this 5 is going to cancel this 5. I still have the negative sign, so now I've got a negative y. And so I could write it that way. I could write whatever you divide by goes outside the parentheses. And then I've got a negative 4x here and a negative y. But here's that problem again. I don't like there being a negative there. So I would need to go back and divide by a negative 5, which would make this a positive 4x and this a positive y, because the negatives cancel each other out as well. And so now I divided by a negative 5. I've got positive 4x here, and then I've got a positive y. Sometimes our common factor is not a number at all. I've got x squared and 6x. So there's, again, invisible 1 here. So there's no number I can divide by, but what do both of these pieces have in common? An x. So I can divide by an x. So x squared is the same as x times x. And if I divide that by x, x on bottom, x on top cancel out. And all I'm left with is just an x. Here, 6x divided by x, x on bottom, x on top, all I'm left with is a 6. And so the number or the variable I divided by was an x. Here I have an x, and here I have a positive 6. And again, you should be able to work in reverse. If you go back and you distribute, x times x is x squared, x times 6 is 6x. You should be able to check your work by doing the opposite and working in reverse. On number 3, just so I can kind of get you started, because on these two, we could divide, the 8, 24, we could divide by 8. Here we could divide 48 by 3. Oh my good Lord.
Davis, please return to class. Thank you.
Killing me. All right. 12x and 22. What number can I divide into both 12 and 22? What number for sure do we know? What number? There's another absolute guaranteed we can divide this number. 2, because they're both evens. So you can't always get rid of everything. So both of these, just so you know, you're going to divide by a 2. And this one's the same thing. It's not going to break down all the way. All right, so that's factoring. Let's look at division now. So if I'm dividing a polynomial, that's something like this, just by a number. 15x, and then I'm going to write the positive 42 here. This is the same thing as what we were doing here, sort of. I'm going to divide this by 3, and I'm going to divide this by 3. But instead of, I'm not factoring, I'm actually dividing 3 into that. I'm making 3 groups, and I want to know how many would be in one of those groups. And so all I do here is I do the math. So 15 divided by 3 is a 5, and then I keep the x. And then 42 divided by 3 is a 14. So when I divide 15x plus 42 divided by 3, my answer is 5x plus 14. You can do this with factors too if it looks better to your eyeballs. So I know that 15 is the same as 3 times 5, and then we've got that x, and I'm dividing by 3, and I can go through the process of elimination and canceling, and I have that 5x left over. So you can do it that way as well with the division. Sometimes we've got bigger things to divide, like this. This we need to set up like a regular division problem. Bottom always goes on the outside, top goes on the inside. And so how we do this one is we just look at the first pieces. And we go, what would I have to multiply x by to get a 9x? By a 9. So that 9 actually goes here. And just like regular division, 9 times x is 9x. 9 times 4 is 36. And in division we subtract, right? In this we subtract, but what we're doing is we're changing the signs. So this is a positive 9x, so I change it to negative. This is a positive 36, so I change it to negative. This cancels, and so my answer is 9. We will not see a lot like this yet. We'll see a lot more of these later, okay? All right, last one, and I'm only going to leave 3 problems for you to work on your own today. Sometimes we get remainders. I don't think I've given you any remainder ones on any assignment past this point. Like on your quiz on Monday, there won't be any ones with remainders. On the unit test, there won't be any ones with remainders. All right, we've got 7x plus 9, 14x plus 28. Okay. So I look at the first pieces. So 7x times what gives me a 14x? 2. Okay. The reason it goes here is because it lines up. It's a plain old 2, so it goes over the plain old number. So 2 times 7x is 14x. 2 times 9 is 18. And I subtract by changing signs. So these will cancel, but 28 minus 18 is a 10. So if I have something left over, once I get to this term, this constant term, I take my remainder, and I'm going to write it as a fraction. It's going to be the numerator. And then what I divided by is going to be the denominator. So my answer is technically a fraction. But those they get kind of tricky, so that's why I don't give any of them to you as graded ones, but I want you to see it and have an idea of what you're supposed to do. Okay, Ants, you and I are about to go to war. Oh. All right, that gives you 3 questions to do. 2 factoring, 1 division. That's it. Okay? If you didn't finish the quiz, go ahead and finish that up. Do those 3 questions. I'm more than happy to check, help, any of that good stuff. This class will end at 9:26, so you have 13 minutes.